Ohayo gozaimasu and good morning. It's basically my total knowledge of Japanese language, so this is very limited. Thank you very much, Guillaume and Gilles, for inviting me to come here. So I'm working at the Yokohama National University for 1 year. I'm visiting professorship there. Very nice to be with you, and I heard a lot about your interest in this topic. So let's see what I can tell you about the history of UNESCO's global actions in biodiversity, conservation, sustainable development for the last 77 years. And you may ask later why 77 years. So let's start. I introduce myself. I am the former director of the Division of Ecological and Earth Sciences of UNESCO. I worked more than 30 years in UNESCO in Paris. So now at Yokohama National University, but I'm also the senior research associate at the UNESCO chair at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Just that you have a little glance so what I'm doing. So who knows what it means, UNESCO?
United Nations.
Nations?
Ecological.
No, educational?
Society. Social.
Scientific? And C?
Community.
Cultural? Organization. So, because, you know, there are 40 UN systems. One is UN, United Nations. You know, New York, the big building, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, and so on. And so they have 39 other specialized agencies or institutions or different things. One of this is UNESCO. There is another one in Japan. Who knows that? In Tokyo. This is the United Nations University. It's in Tokyo. Very close in Shibuya and Aoyamadori. So this is a UN body that's working on academia with universities. Okay. So this has been established in 1946, just after World War II. Here you see some black and white photos for the first General Conference in 46. Because from UNESCO there was what they call here a forerunner. And this is a text that I'm using from MEXT. Who knows what is MEXT? This is a Japanese ministry. Ministry on Education, Tourism, Scientific Research, and many other things. Is in Tokyo. And they are responsible dealing with UNESCO-related affairs. This is why I took this text. So there was another agency, International Committee for Intellectual Cooperation. This was established in 1922. There were some famous participants to this. For example, Albert Einstein. I think this person is known. Marie Curie. She's a Polish origin, Polish scientist who worked a lot with radioactive elements. Inazo Nitobe, a Japanese scholar, was Undersecretary General of this league. So there was a sort of think tank before on these topics, what would be UNESCO. You just identified them. Sorry. Education, science, culture, and today's also social sciences and communication. So there were then with the French government another institution later created, International Institute for Intellectual Cooperation. This is good to know because these things are not just falling from sky because somebody had an idea. These things develop. This was stopped with World War II because all international cooperation and everything stopped. And then after World War II in November 45, there was a United Nations conference for the establishment of this organization in London. There were 44 countries that came together. This was initiated by France and UK. And at the end of the conference, there was a declaration to create UNESCO, Education, Science and Culture, those days. So there was an agreement. This came into force. Then a year later in 46. I mean, 46, we are speaking of 1 year after the war. So where we are today is a UN agency. The UN agencies have member states. Not all agencies have all member states. Maybe later in the questions I will come back to that. And out of these member states, people are elected to be the Director General. I mean, really the CEO, no, Chief Executive Officer of the agency. Though this started with Julian Huxley in 46 from UK. And then you see all the list of people until today. Today is Audrey Azoulay from France, elected in 2017, re-elected in 2021. So these are all the Director Generals of the organization. So here's some photos where you can see with the Senegalese, for example, Director General Mbo, with Monsieur Maheu from France. You see also on the left side, this is Koichiro Matsura. We come back. He was Director General from 1999 to 2009. So from Japan. And he is speaking there with the Pope in Rome. This lady here, this is Audrey Azoulay. So now the Director General today. So this is an introduction for UNESCO, but in fact we didn't want to speak so much about UNESCO. This was 77 years up to now, what UNESCO and the origins and all this. But now I would like to focus on the efforts on the past 50 years of UNESCO. What has UNESCO done for the conservation, biodiversity conservation, nature conservation, and sustainable development? So there was the creation of 3 tools, 3 mechanisms to do so. There's the Man in the Biosphere program, was created in 1971. The World Heritage Convention, created in 1972. And the UNESCO Global Geoparks program. This was created in 2015. So you see roughly the last 50 years, 51 years. So, and my last job in UNESCO, I was directing the Man in the Biosphere program and the UNESCO Global Geoparks program. So what is this? What are we talking about? These are mainly sites that have been designated by countries to be of national interest and importance. For example, let's take a World Heritage Site here in Japan. Yakushima Island is an island, a natural World Heritage Site, protected for outstanding universal value. Or Himeji Castle, a cultural site, is also outstanding universal value. Biosphere reserve, well, I will explain later. Biosphere reserves are models for development and conservation, and geoparks also. I will explain this later. But where are these sites now? There. You see all the little colored points. The blue is the Biosphere reserve, the gray is the cultural World Heritage, the orange is the mixed World Heritage, the Bordeaux is the natural World Heritage site, and the yellowish is the UNESCO Global Geopark. So you see, this is a global program. And this is very important to understand. When you hear about these programs, these are not local, not national programs, these are global programs. So basically mainly all the members, all the states of the world are participating in that. Right now we are here. And you see that Japan is very active in this, but also in Europe. But when you see the map, what do you see immediately when you see the little dots on the global map? Where are these sites? Or if I ask the other way around, why are so few sites here, or here, or here in the middle, and why are so many sites here? Because there are people living there. No? This is development and protection, but also always related to human beings. So this is mainly done where people are living. I think this is one first very important point to understand. When you put all this, if you would push them all together, it would give a size of 10 million square kilometers. What does it mean? It means roughly the size of China. This area, roughly the size of China, China is something like that here. These are together are all under these different brands and labels. And I will later explain a little bit how much for each and which size. But this just that you know where it is. I like to use this picture of the iceberg. You know an iceberg, no? It's a piece of ice in the water, and you see only the top of it. This is what we always say, the iceberg. You see only the top of the iceberg. The top of the iceberg, I would like to compare it here with the World Heritage. It's outstanding universal value, it's known, it's fantastic, you see all the great sites, big visibility. But then you see the big part of the blue layer below the top of the iceberg. This is the bulk of the iceberg. These are the biosphere reserves. They are less known, less visible, but they cover the overwhelming majority of the sites. And then you see a little bit at the bottom here in green, the geoparks. This is another system, and I will explain it later. Very small, but it's coming. It's coming, it's improving, it's getting better. 28%, 70%, 2%. This just to give you an idea why some areas are very well known and others less, but what are also the relationship between. Because when you put this more in hectares, then you see, for example, here in yellow or orange, the size of the World Heritage Sites. And World Heritage Sites, you heard already, there are two: cultural World Heritage Sites and natural World Heritage Sites. I mentioned the Himeji Castle. This is just one castle, so one big building. But when you go to another area like Yakushima Island, it's a full island with the sea around. So in surface, we are talking on totally two different things. However, biosphere reserves is always a surface, it's always an area. And geoparks is the same. So this to visualize you the difference of the sizes between these designations. Okay, I hope more or less clear. So let's go directly into the different designations. World Heritage. This is the building of the World Heritage offices at UNESCO. There was a secretariat created in 1972. They moved in this building in 92, but the secretariat is already quite old. They have this year the 50th anniversary of the convention. This secretariat is, of course, just, sort of administration. What we do in UNESCO is administration. But the one who are running the work are selected people from our member states. They are normally elected to be the president of the convention, to be the bureau, to be the decision-taking body. So what we call now today state parties, it's the member states. Because also in the program, you have member states. Not all countries are members of all programs. You know, a country, it's a sovereign identity. The country decides what to do, with whom, where and when. There is no loss of sovereignty that UN is coming to a country saying you must now do this and that. No. The country is always the boss and decides. The problem in here, in this in this tools organization, is that you don't have one boss, you have 194 bosses. No? So this is the role of the Secretariat to get this working. And organizing, for example, nomination of sites, new nomination of sites, capacity building training, technical assistance, for example, when there is a catastrophe in one area, an earthquake or floods. Now we had big floods in Pakistan. How to mobilize assistance from the states to one side. There's a World Heritage Fund. The World Heritage Fund gets 1% of the member state contribution to UNESCO and is also generating funding for projects. Of course, it has advisory bodies. This means bodies that work with this convention. This is the International Council on Monuments and Sites. You see already monuments. This is more the cultural aspect. The International Center for the Study, Preservation, Restoration of Cultural Property, because cultural property under the World Heritage Convention has a special definition. For example, whatever enters as a monument in the World Heritage must have at least, I think, 60 or 70% of its original construction. So, for example, if a monument has been destroyed in a war, this may happen, and you build it up new, it cannot be World Heritage because it's not original. So there is one criteria, it must be original. If you have a temple here that has 500 years and it burns down totally and you rebuild it, okay, it's fine, but it's not World Heritage anymore. And then IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. This is for the natural part of the World Heritage. So it's very important to understand that the Secretariat has technical advisory bodies to give, let's say, the technical assistance. Why is this so? Because you need in this program a credibility. You need, of course, efficient conservation. You need really to do something concrete. I put this photo here. Somebody knows what this means, this photo? In which country this is? This is in Egypt, when they built the Aswan Dam, was flooding a whole valley. And there was, of course, Abu Simbel and other temples that would be completely flooded by the dam. So the whole temple was cut into pieces and was brought up 80 meters high. The dam was built, and the water is coming today again up to the feet of the temple, but the temple is outside. As the temple is original, it's only the mountain behind the temple is a sort of sarcophage. It is World Heritage. But it was very important to safeguard this temple because it's the national pride. It is the heritage of the ancient Egypt of the pharaoh times. Of course, capacity building is very important. You need people that know about working on these topics, know about how to preserve, how to work with these sites. Communication is very important. It's not enough to have good sites, you have to communicate it. You have to make campaigns. And of course, what is very important, you have to bring in the local population. Because sometimes these initiatives have been done, what we call top-down, decided by the national government without any support from the local people. So what you can get is a sort of resistance against this work that is done. So it's very important to involve the local population in this work. Just a little map, maybe something confusing. There are 1,154 World Heritage Sites in 167 countries. This is July last year. You see here how many cultural sites, how many natural sites, and mixed sites. What does it mean, a mixed site? A mixed site is, for example, Machu Picchu, you know, in Peru. This is the citadel, of course, a construction of the Inca times. But the whole site is a fantastic natural site. This is a mixed site. Some of them, quite a number, in fact, 43, are transboundary. Means that the site goes over a political border. You know, ecology, biodiversity don't care so much about political borders. Only because we humans have decided here is a border. Biodiversity is not interested in that. They just continue. So the interest was here, of course, to create sites that go over this border. This is then not one site. These are two sites that work together. But it's very important because UNESCO has been created in 1945, after the war. Why? Because after the war, new tools were used to promote peace, to foster peace in the world. And all the work that's done by UNESCO is in fact this overall goal, to promote peace in the world. But promote peace in the world, what does it mean? You can say, oh, you must make no war, you go for peace. Yeah, but you have tools. You must do something. You must bring the people together to work together on certain topics, like protection of cultural property, protection of natural property. And this is not easy. So here you see, this is a map of the World Heritage. You see them more or less, if you can see it. It's not easy to understand, but anyway. Yeah. Again, the figures, and then I'm bringing you some nice pictures also. So there is the picture here from Panama, from Barbados, Machu Picchu already mentioned, well, I saw better pictures, from Tunisia, from the Republic of Korea, or from Australia. Australia, for example, this Uluru site, it's supposed to be a meteorite far from sky, was always protected in the past as a natural site until the local inhabitants protested and said, no, no, this is a cultural site because this is our ancestors, this is a religious site. It has something to do with our ancient culture, so it's a mixed site now. Here you see many other photos of these sites. You see Hagia Sophia in Turkey, Komodo Varan here. Well, I don't want to go too much into details. There's a nice photo of Machu Picchu, yeah. And so on. So you see, these are all sites with outstanding cultural and natural value. It goes over national boundaries, and it is very important to protect this not just for us, but also for future generations. Because this has been built, created by people before us. These nature sites were areas that were by far before us. So we must do something to have them for future generations. Also large sites, like for example this Sagarmatha National Park in Nepal. It looks easy to say, yeah, but this is protecting by itself, no? We don't need to do anything. You heard about climate change. Climate change is changing a lot here. And if all this gets warmer, melting can occur, landslides. There is a lot of destruction that can come. This site in China, Ngorongoro in Tanzania, where there is a big conflict between people who want to protect this outstanding nature. You all heard about the parks in Africa when you see films about the savannas in Africa. But what you never see normally in these films is that there are people living. And these people are raising cattle. And they don't want to have their cow eaten up by a lion. So sometimes they kill the lion. So there is a problem. And on one side you want to protect the animals, the nature, and the other side people say, hey, wait, we want to live here from something. So this is a group of tourists here that brings, of course, income. So at one moment it was said, tourism, ecotourism, this is the solution. People bring in money so people can live on the area because they are not just earning money from agriculture, from cattle raising, but from tourism. Fine. So we can use this money also to protect the nature. This was very good until came COVID. And the tourism was over, zero. You remember here in Japan 2 years ago, tourism, zero almost. No? So we need also to think about new paradigms. And maybe we have later in the discussion the occasion to go about that. This Yuzhaigu karstic valley in China, it's really outstanding site. I already mentioned Yakushima Island here in Japan. This is a list of the 25 World Heritage Sites in Japan. I didn't put the names. Maybe later you will tell me what's the name of all this. We'll see. But you see they are all over Japan, very well distributed. In red are the natural World Heritage Sites, and in blue the cultural World Heritage Sites. We may come back later to it. Okay, this was the World Heritage. Now we come to the Man and the Biosphere program, the MAP program. I already said, in the history, this started in 1971. There was a sort of coordination council, again in UNESCO, a group of people that came together thinking that in nature conservation, in the normal life, there is a problem. And the problem is that you have conservation and use. I already mentioned this a little bit. And this creates a problem. So those days, Director General, René Maheu, French, said that we must create a tool to handle with this. Last year was the 50th anniversary, by the way, also of this program. So these two tools I already mentioned, they're not that new, but I think the ideas are still very pertinent, and sometimes I feel they are quite new. There was in 1972 a United Nations Conference on Human Environment, and that really, and then here I quote, to develop the basis between the natural and social sciences for the rational use and conservation of the resources of the biosphere and for the improvement of the global relationship between man and the environment. Because what these people already were seeing, that there is a rising conflict between conservation and development, means use of the land. So almost 50 years ago, or now here 50 years ago, there was this conference saying, we see more and more this problem coming. What shall we do? So UNEP is another UN body, headquarters in Nairobi, United Nations Environmental Program. They made together with UNESCO a conference in 1974 saying, okay, we have identified the problem, but what to do? And they decided, when I say they, it's not the UN agency that decided, again, it's the people nominated by the countries that works in this body, they decide. These are normally the most scientific, the most prominent people in countries, delegated by the country to participate in these bodies. They said we must have sites. Sites that have a protection function, this here, that have a development function, and they have a logistical support, and I will come to it. So as three zones of the sites, not just protection, not just a natural park, and then that's it. Because a natural park we have, very good, but we know that there is this conflict I'm always talking about. And the conflict is, when we have a national park, we have tendency to put in nature into a sort of bottle and say, oh, we protect that. And then outside, we can do what we want because we have already protected. But the problem is this doesn't work. This creates islands that are not sustainable. Sustainable means that will not continue on the protection function. So if you don't break this glass, if you don't have the incorporation from the people living in the area in the protection business, the protection on the long run will not work. And this is something quite important because there is one platform, IPBS, called International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They is a group of scientists. They say that in the next 10 years, the world will lose 1 million species, will disappear. Because overuse of natural resources, overuse of natural land, and if we continue just like that, this will happen. So what to do to stop that? And then was the idea of the creation of this biosphere reserve. The title is somewhat odd, but c'est comme ça. It's the name. What is a biosphere reserve? It's a protected area. The green part is called core area. It's really a protected area protected by natural law. Because when you do protection like a national park, no UN body can do some. This only the countries can do, because the countries have the sovereignty. There's a buffer zone around this protected area, mainly dedicated to protection, but also landscape management, ecological practices with, let's say, little population. And then is the area where I would say the work is done, is the transition or development area. This is an area with all sorts of agriculture, all sorts of work, can even have small villages or cities where best practices are implemented. And I will give you later some examples for that. This is a biosphere reserve. So you see, from the protection to the use, it is one scheme. The figures now may vary because I'm using slides made by the Secretariat. And in the meantime, the figures have changed a lot. So now we have more than 730 biosphere reserves in the world. 22 of them are transboundary, 2 are transcontinental. They alone cover 5% of the surface of the world. This is the size of Australia. You have more than 270 million people living in these areas. This sounds a lot, but I think 3-4 days ago, the world population went over 8 billion. So when you have 275 million to 8 billion, there is a difference. But already, I mean, it's on the way. I think it's on the way. It's not so bad. The big size, of course, of the biosphere reserve is here. Maybe you cannot see that. It is here the transition area, large site, followed by a buffer zone, and of course the core area is the smallest size. I like to put this slide here because these are some curious facts about these biosphere reserves. Let's start with number 1. Brazil has the biggest one, with 1 million over 700,000 square kilometers. 13 federal states. Goes the entire border here from Uruguay until here. So you see already, biosphere reserve had not a limit of size. And Costa Rica, you know, the small country, became famous here in football. Don't worry, Germany has also lost a game. This happens. More than half of the country is a biosphere reserve. Spain, another champion, has the biggest number with 52 sites. the highest mountains in the world, Mount Everest, and the Omalanga Biosphere Reserve in China is part of it. And now something that's quite interesting, we talked about species, extinction of species. The entire population of the Sumatra orang-utan, this is more than 6,000 individuals, live in the Gunung Leuser Biosphere Reserve in Indonesia. Here, where is this dot here? This means that the entire population of one of our cousins, because the great apes are our cousins, they are not that different from us, live in a biosphere reserve. So if you would not have this biosphere reserve now, you would not have this species anymore. Great ape species, there are not that many on the world. So we are already getting to the border. Normally we say, yeah, in all this we still have margin, we still have possibilities. No, we are getting to the border. This means one step more, and you may lose the entire species. So this to give you also a taste of there is certain agency, emergency now for action. But also not just to speak on nature. In Canada, the Tsatswe community, this is an indigenous community, or how they call their First Nation in Canada, have created around their territory a biosphere reserve because they say we are part of nature, nature is part of us. With our indigenous community, we create this one site. Another example, Hoodis cluster here in South Africa. It's the only place where you have 3 recognized biodiversity hotspots that merge. This is an area where you have a lot of endemic species. We have a lot of outstanding flora and fauna that come together. So just to give you some figures, and I don't want to go too much into the percentage. The official figure now is 738 biosphere reserves in 134 countries, including 22 transboundary biosphere reserves. I explained already the transboundary topic. Where are they? Again here, you see. And when I come back to my early question, when you see the dots on the map, why are they there? Because there is no biosphere reserve where there is no people living. A biosphere reserve is not a national park. It's not something where you say people out. No, it's people in. So there is only biosphere reserve where you have population living because of these 3 zoning, remember? This is why you have some areas where we know it's a little bit crowded. Europe, Central America, and where you have many sites, and some areas it's not really crowded, where you have some very few areas. And of course here in the Pacific, in the islands, there are a lot of countries that do not have biosphere reserve. So now the question is, how many countries exist on the world? 100? 98.
No?
Too much. Too many. 95. We are close. And so only 134 countries have biosphere reserve because it's a sovereignty of the country to decide if they want to have one or not. And so also sometimes they feel they are too small, like Pacific small island states. Sometimes still the message has not passed, like Angola, for example, a big country. So one role of the whole program is also to get all on board. They are participating, of course, in big international events, like, for example, here the IUCN Congress. I already mentioned earlier IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. IUCN is also an advisory body to the Man and the Biosphere program. Oh, time is flying. So, biosphere reserves in Japan, where are they? There are 10. Here I put the figures because already they may be less known than the World Heritage Sites. So let's start from the north. Tadami, Minami Alps, Kobushi, the most recent one, Mount Hakusan, Sobo, Katamuki, Okue, Mount Odaigaihara and the other mounts, Aya, and Yakushima and the other islands. So this is the distribution of the biosphere reserves in Japan. So Japan is a very active country in all these programs, by the way. Not only active by having sites in the country, but also being active in cooperation, sponsoring regional networks. I didn't want to go too much into that, but maybe in the discussion we can come on it. Okay, the third program, and then we are finished. There are not more programs. It's the International Geoscience program. They work really on geosciences, geological sciences. I don't want to go too much into that. I want to go into UNESCO Global Geoparks program. The same thing as the biosphere reserve came from the biological side in the protection and the development. The Geoparks program is coming from the geological side on landscapes and protection on Earth heritage. So in 2015, when the program started, some 120 geoparks created this global UNESCO Global Geoparks network. But today means April 2022. There are 177 in 46 countries. So we can easily see it's a very new program, it's growing, and it's getting more and more prominent. What are the direct benefits? I listed it just here. For example, tourism, 200% in China, 300% in Vietnam, a lot in poor areas. Visitors, 3.6 million, for example, in one site. What member states often ask are, where is the return for for investment? Because when you create a site, this costs money. You must make an evaluation, you must make a mapping, you must have with the people, awareness raising, this costs money. So a lot of decision makers, they ask, okay, if you want to go for that, where's the return for investment? And we have absolute figures. The return for investment is 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So you will not become rich with these programs, but you will have a good return for investment, means that this thing is very useful. For example, here you have regional workshop, intensive courses, field visits, and all the international cooperation that comes with these programs. Where are they located? Here again, they are there where you have people living. Again, Geoparks program is not something where there is nobody living. The program is still very young. So for example, only 2 sites in Africa, but many sites here in Europe, in China, in Japan, and in, let's say, in the Americas is very new. I don't know whether you saw it. The US is very prominent in World Heritage and Biosphere Reserves, but has no site on geoparks. There was a decision in UNESCO some years ago to have Palestine as a member state. In consequence, the US and Israel left UNESCO, because I told you, the UN agencies have member states. The member state decides whether it wants to be a member or not of an organization. The World Heritage Sites and the Biosphere Reserves can also be in countries that are non-member states of UNESCO. But the nomination of geoparks is only possible by member states. So the US, not a member state, cannot nominate. The same is, of course, valid for Taiwan. Taiwan, you know, the question with China is tricky, and it's also a non-member state. Just thus to give you an overview where all this is located. So, in fact, we would need more sites, better distributed. For example, in Africa, it's definitely needed. Where are the geoparks in Japan? Yeah, I think you can read it. In Japan, I must say there's also a national geopark network and the UNESCO Global Geopark Network. So there are 9 UNESCO geoparks in Japan, but there are many more on the national level that are not so far recognized by UNESCO. So you have them here in Hokkaido, you have them in Kyushu, here in Shikoku, and also in the Kanto region, Izu Island, and so on. So well distributed, but I think Japan is in that sense a very active partner in that program. So, coming to the end, why are we doing all this? Why are member states so active in this? I already mentioned that we have some problems. As IPBS informed us, we may lose in the next 10 years 1 million species. We have the problem of conflict between nature protection and resource use. We have climate change and its impact, and I think we noticed this here. So we have many initiatives working on that. You all may know the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that are decided and that will finish, let's say the target should be achieved in 2030. These are all the different programs. But it has been decided by what is called here the High Ambition Coalition to have a 30 by 30 challenge. 30 by 30 challenge means by 2030, 30% of the world's surface, terrestrial and marine, should be protected, 10% strictly protected. If we achieve this target, we can stop biodiversity loss, we can mitigate the impact of climate change, and we can certainly make a substantial contribution to protect the ecosystems and the working together economic security, because a lot of our economics depending on nature. For example, I just visited here in the Tanzawa mountain a dam that produces a lot of electricity for the Tokyo region. This is a service that comes from the ecosystem. The water is raining, is dammed, producing electricity, guaranteeing for the Tokyo area a lot of drinking water and electricity. So this is a real ecosystem service. This all has its price in nature. And so when we think about this 30 by 30 challenge, it's really how to achieve this protection and integrated sustainable use of renewable nature resources. I think UNESCO, and you saw the numbers of the sites, has 2,000 sites covering 6% of the terrestrial surface. If all the 195 member states of UNESCO would be part of it and would be active member in the system, I think 50% of this challenge can be met only by using these programs. And this is in fact my sort of take-home message. It is not something that is in the clouds, because frequently one gets a sort of accusation that all this is all theory. Yeah, it's all theory, because you have also to have targets, ambitious targets. But you must also arrive at one moment where you can say, what can we really do? Is this feasible or not? Can we make a substantial contribution? I think we can. When I say we, coming back. It's of course not the UN system. It is the people in the country, it's the government, it's you in the countries that can make this. And so these are in fact my basic measures, and I stop here, and arigatou gozaimasu, and thank you very much.
Okay, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, or comments, or...
Was long, sorry, but these programs you cannot explain in 5 minutes. This takes some time. Okay, we start there.
I wanted to ask what like personal contributions towards climate change could be. So like what we could do against climate change, maybe.
Excuse me, a little bit louder.
What we could do against climate change, like personal contributions.
For the climate change.
Yeah, so like to actually help, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we understand, for example, that climate change, there are a lot of reasons for climate change that are natural, but there are also reasons that are human-made. And for example, emissions of CO2. Emissions of CO2 means we burn basically fossil energy, and this produces a lot of CO2 in the air. But we can also capture CO2 from the air. For example, there is the Yokohama Blue Carbon Initiative to rehabilitate the port area, the ancient port area here, by re-establishing seagrasses in the harbor. Marine coastal areas are the biggest areas for sequestration of CO2. When a tree is growing, it takes CO2 from the air, releases oxygen, and produces biomass. When you burn this tree, or when you burn fossil fuels, because fossil fuels come from ancient trees, you release it. So it's a reversible process. So if you re-establish these natural areas, you capture CO2 from the air. If you restore natural degraded areas, you can capture a lot of CO2 from the air. Also, I had the, let's say, social aspects of this. When you established good functional systems in human societies, means local transport, common transport, you can avoid a lot of these emissions. I already mentioned in Tanzawa Mountain this dam that produces electricity. This captures the water produces electricity. This is something that also can stop enormously the use of individual cars. Or the whole car, for example, industry is moving to electric cars. But where is all this electricity coming from? We don't want to produce electricity by burning fossil fuels. That would be stupid, because you produce energy to produce another energy, so there is a big loss. So you must produce energy by using renewable energies. For example, here in Japan, you have a lot of hydrologic energy. You can have a lot of solar energy. But for example, in the whole country, what I saw, the only aeolic wind park energy I saw in Yokohama, one in the harbor, one. So there is a huge potential, for example, to develop aeolic energy. If you have this sort of energy, you don't need to put emissions of CO2. Conserving nature, conserving forests, also stops the emissions of CO2. Not only just from the biomass, from cutting the trees and, let's say, burning them. You have a lot of biomass in the soil. When you change a system, a natural system, the whole biomass that is on the soil, trees, shrubs and all this, is one part. But in some ecosystems, the biggest part of the biomass is in the soil. So when you change this system, you liberate all this as CO2 in the air. So there is a big contribution on this, I think, to mitigate climate change, climate impact. But of course, there are some natural phenomena that we cannot, of course, control. The same thing is, of course, for conservation of species. I already mentioned this possible loss of 1 million species. I mean, one problem is we are simply too many people on Earth. 8 billion, as I said some days ago. The provisions are that we will go until 10 billion, at least. Let's say 2050, or maybe 2070. I think there is something to be done. When they would ask me what is to be done, it is certainly, I would certainly think, particularly in developing countries, of two main actions. It is family planning and women empowerment. Because in many of these countries, you need really women empowerment to decide on birth rates, on population growth. Wow.
On that note, do you know anything about the UN in any of those initiatives? Like, are there any programs specifically for women empowerment?
Well, there is UN Women. It's an entire agency working on that. But this has become part of all the programs. I mean, also in the MAP program and all this, there is always, I didn't want to go too much into detail, but there are priorities. And there is a priority, what we call gender equity, gender transformation in the system, gender transformative systems, youth and Africa. I mean, this has been decided. So it is incorporated in all the programs, but there are specialized agencies working on that. I think also UNICEF is the agency for children, where I think by far more known than all the other agencies, have of course this heavy part on this. Because this doesn't not only mean let's say let's have less children. This is not the way. Women empowerment means also sort of equity of job security, of also child care. For example, in my country, in Germany, was a big discussion how to organize nationwide child care. In some countries, it's simply too expensive. Many people cannot afford it. So one has to stay home. And of course, this limits the way of seeing it. This has maybe a hard negative effect. In other countries, it's a total other story. You know? In Nordic countries, for example, there are big social systems. I think the gender equity is achieved there. But I think really the main agency working on this topic especially is UN Women.
Do you have any specific examples on how you help conserve, for example, the mountains in Nepal, and what are the biggest challenges that you face?
I didn't get the last one.
Do you have any specific examples on how you help preserve and conserve these sites, and what are the biggest challenges in doing so?
How to preserve these sites?
Yeah, specifically the mountains in Nepal against climate change.
In Nepal? Well, Nepal has, of course, national parks. Nepal has World Heritage Sites. Unfortunately, so far, no biosphere reserve and no geoparks. I know for biosphere reserves, I went there myself. They have some outstanding biodiversity. For example, they have one of the biggest tiger population and rhino population, high altitude rhino population. So far working on that, I would say. But what in Nepal has been a long problem is a political instability that really hinders sometimes the creation of this. Because the creation of national parks has been done in many of these countries in colonial times. This was, of course, the typical top-down. Somebody decides, and you live in the area, you shut up. This should not be the case today. So today, when you want to do something, you get a lot of movements against it. Also for biosphere reserve, you get a lot of problems people do not accept because it has not been explained to them. They are feeling they will not be allowed to do this and that. So this is in Nepal still, I think, a problem. We have an office there. We are working with them. When I say we, I'm still with my UNESCO hat, no? We are trying here, I'm trying with the university now to work on a program on a neighbor country, on Bhutan. Because Bhutan is a kingdom. It's pretty isolated so far. They really closed the border. If you want to go to Bhutan, it's quite difficult, but it's a fantastic country. And we're working with them also to be on board, very active in these programs. But the problem of understanding is something. I will give you an example from another country, from Spain. There is an island called Lanzarote. There's a smaller island on the north of Lanzarote, Graciosa. And they increased the fisheries, the capacity of fishery, but at the same time the harvest, what they got out on fish, decreased. So there was a problem. The more they fish, the less they get. So we know if this continues like that, there will be a big problem, not just for biodiversity, because fish is also biodiversity, but also for simply economic income and for food for the people. So within this biosphere reserve, it has been decided between this island of Lanzarote and the Graciosa island to establish a totally no-go zone. No fishing at all. No industrial fishing, no local fishing, no sport, what some people call sport fishing, when they come with their big boats and then. There was a huge movement of the fishermen communities against that. You stop us for our earning our money, our living conditions, you are trying to kill us, and I don't know what. We explained that several times. This is for your benefit, because what we protect in this area is the nursery of your fish. Because fish produce, many of them, particularly those who are used, in coastal areas, not in the big ocean. In the coastal areas, you have the biggest reproduction sites for fish. So if you protect this area and you say nobody goes there, fish, the fish starts to produce, to reproduce, and one day, in inverted commas, the area is full. When the area is full, fish goes out. And then the fisherman can get it. After several years, they understood. And they saw that the quota for fish was going up. So today, those who protect this area are not the environmentalists, are the fishermen. They say nobody is going there. But it took some time to pass this message. It took some time that they also had figures. Because you can say, when you do this, when you do that, then this will happen. They say, I believe you or I do not believe you. But this time, they had evidence. But this is where these programs, of course, are not easy, because you need 4, 5, 6 years to prove that what you're saying is right. So this is, I think, a very visible example how you can, at the same time, protect biodiversity, but also protect income. And this means, income is not just, you can also buy the fish from other countries, but it is a local culture, it is your species, it is your way, how you deal with your immediate nature. Yep.
The 30 by 30 program, how's that progressing? Because it's not that long until it's 2030.
How will this?
How is it going along? What percentage?
Yeah, how this is working out. Yeah. Good question. UN system we learn to have to be always on the positive side. You know, it's like the bottle of water that is half. It can be half full or half empty, as you see it. So we always say it's half full. And I think it's on the way. It's happening. I think the awareness raising in the country is increasing. You have all these big international conferences that happen on that topic. Again, it's really feasible. I mean, all these sites, all these results from these sites have been communicated to the Secretary General of UN, Antonio Guterres, who normally in his speeches to the presidents of the country is mentioning that. The results and all this is available. It depends, of course, on the countries whether we do it. In Japan, for example, the strict protection is now around between 13 and 16%. So this has been achieved. But the overall, the 30%, I think Japan is around 20% now. So I'm trying here with the senseis, with all my colleagues, and of course with the ministry, to convince that there is something needed to improve this. To go really in the next 8 years to 2030. But of course you cannot force any country to do anything. I mean, the country must do it itself. Some countries, I told, Costa Rica is by 50%, but Costa Rica is a very small country. When you see this with Russia, it's a very big country, but not that much populated. I think still the designation of sites, although they have big and large sites, could be improved. But this you cannot force. You can just hope that it will happen. You can make it positive. You can make public meetings. On the University of Yokohama, we created a UNESCO chair on education for biodiversity conservation in biosphere reserves. And this chair has been launched last week on Monday. So things are moving, things are going on. We see in our figures that we get every year up to 20 new biosphere reserves. We see also that we get constantly new countries on board, because the very important thing is that all the countries participate. Yeah, one should not give up hope.
Are there like differences or like similarities between like countries which are like active towards the like biodiversity thing and like the Geoparks thing, and like the countries that aren't like doing this?
You mean that countries collaborate for conservation, or?
Yeah, like the countries who actually take part in like conserving, and the countries that don't.
You have a lot of you mean this transboundary cooperation? Yeah. These sites that I mentioned, they're quite interesting. Just to give you some examples, Peru, Ecuador. They created a transboundary biosphere reserve called Bosques de Paz, means forest of peace. Why this? Because it's a transboundary area where they have a biosphere reserve from two sides. But in the 50s, they had a war in this area. Because when these countries came to establish themselves, the border was not clear. So sometimes to clear up the border, they decided to have a war. And so this was an area that was disputed by the countries. This dispute has been settled, and now they decided to work out a biosphere reserve there. Or, for example, between Poland and Ukraine, there is a transboundary biosphere reserve. And when you hear about borders now, Ukraine and Russia, you hear about the war over there. So these things bring together people that see mainly in their difference a source of conflict, not a source of joint work. Or another biosphere reserve had been created between 5 countries: Austria, Hungary, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. They had some 20 years ago a war, exactly, when the former Yugoslavia fell apart. And they created a 5-country biosphere reserve around the Danube-Mura-Drava river system, with the aim of having a joint conservation and management system for this river. Because they say if we all make our own little plans here, the plan is good, but it stops at the water, and then there may be another plan. So one decides, I want to have a nature, fantastic. The other next says, I want to have a dam, because I need that water. The other says, I want maybe to deviate the river somewhere else. No, doesn't really make sense, because these are small countries. So if you make a joint management system for the whole thing, for protection of sites and use of sites, it's for the benefit of everybody. And they really focused also a lot on tourism. They said this area, due to the war, this is not that long time ago, has basically no tourism. But you have the big countries like France, Germany, UK, and so on in Europe. Many people want to go there. They don't know what to do. So you must give them a tool. When they go to the area, they say, oh, that's interesting. It's peace now, so we can visit. We are not killed when we go there. No, I mean what people just imagine. It is a sort of development, but development costs money. Somebody has to pay for it. There is no, what we always like to say, there is no free meal in the world. Whatever you want to do, there's a price you have to pay. So who is paying it? And I think this is a tool where you can bring these different aspects together.
It was mentioned in the presentation that there's a possibility that we will lose 1 million species. But when that actually happens, how direct would the impact be on humans?
Yeah, let's start with species. What does it mean, species? How many species do we have on the world? In fact, we don't know. There are estimates of 8 to 40 million species. I mean animal and plant species. And I'm not counting the prokaryote species. Because if you take, if you define it as a species, a virus, a bacteria, and all this, I think we simply do not know. We have some good ideas, but so when we say we lose 1 million species, then we lose 1 million of the species we know, because we know certainly around 8 million species. But this doesn't mean we lose some sort of obscure bacteria somewhere else. No, we may lose a great ape species. This is something that took for the evolution a long time to be as it is. You know, as I said, the great apes are our cousins. We have the same origin. So if a species like that is lost forever. It's certainly not coming back. All these efforts to sometimes to recreate species, something, I don't know. It's gone, is gone. Of course, species are always newly created. For example, when you have this nice flowers, looks like a marguerite. There is some evidence that over 20, 30 years there can be first subspecies, then one day species. When you go for the definition of species. But the creation of species and the destruction is in no relationship. It takes millions of years to create a new species, and it can take very short to make something disappear, like the white rhino or something like that. So it depends on us. When we speak about this species, means that we need to have sufficient areas that are strictly protected, but biodiversity is not only in protected areas. Biodiversity is everywhere. Of course, more or less what one understands by biodiversity. When in the Yokohama National University, there was a professor called Akira Miyawaki. He created the Miyawaki forests. These are basically forests planted on degraded areas with natural species, not introduced species. When you go today through this university campus, the other day I met a raccoon running there. Another student told me he saw a snake. You see a lot of birds, crows and smaller birds. There is a high biodiversity in this area. And it is not a park. It is not a national park. It is in fact a city. It is part of a city. It's just it's a former golf course. So, and when I see this green area over there behind the buildings, no, this is a small forest. There is a high biodiversity there, I'm sure. So species is not only in protected areas. And this is why we must avoid to have this island thinking, that a protected area, there you have the species and then it's fine, and we do what we want. This doesn't really, will not work, particularly not for big animals. For example, a tiger needs normally as a ground 20 square kilometers. This is his living space. If it's smaller, the tiger will not live. Or if it's smaller, if too many people living around, he will one day attack the people. And then he will be killed. So this is how the wolf was extinct in Europe and so on. So you say the probability of saving this 1 million species. I mean, 1 million species, of course, a sort of flagship message. Nobody had really counted in that sense. But those who really know about this topic say this is roughly the estimation. I think if we go for this 30 by 30 challenge and if we achieve it, we can cope with that. But how exactly this will mean, let's hope the best. But it's certainly by establishing these areas, and it's not easy, we can work on that. Yeah, please.
And are there any biosphere reserves or any reserves in Ukraine, and if yes, how are they protected with the war right now, or are they protected?
Biosphere reserves in Ukraine?
Yes.
Yeah. No, there are biosphere reserves in many countries that have war situations. In Syria, for example, there is a biosphere reserve. I think nobody went there in the last 5-6 years. In Mali, in Sudan. Normally when what we call in UN social unrest means war situations or extreme civil war situations. Of course, nature, environment and all this is putting behind because people have other worries. No? They have worries to survive, they have worries to get food, they have worries to simply survive. This, of course, always a very difficult situation. UNESCO can always alarm, sending messages to the different war parties not to harm these areas. For example, when there was this military conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there was a lot of destruction of cultural property sites. And there was an immediately call from UNESCO to both parties to stop that. I think it was quite respected by the countries. But of course, when you have a war situation somewhere, it is very difficult to argue in that sense, no? Because people have really other worries. No? But the important thing is that you have already the area created. Because wars are not eternal, they finish one day. And then frequently you have to restart. But that's life, you restart it again. And I would like to give you a nice example. When there was a unification of Germany, East and West, in the western part, it's a very developed area. Eastern part, due to a lot of loss of population, there was very nice, not used, let's say, areas. And the last vice minister for environment of East Germany, he was a really environmentalist. He took a map and he made a lot of protected areas. Protected areas and biosphere reserves. And when the unification came, they made a condition with the West German government. We will be able to unificate, but you must take these areas into your national protected area scheme. This is compulsory. And I think the politicians of those days said, well, why not? Who cares? Okay. So they agreed in writing to do so. Fine. Unification came. And after a certain time, they noticed, oh, but we have enormously protected areas there. And then the people of that area said, you signed this, so now give us the means to do this job, to protect the area, but also to develop the area in that sense that I explained. And this is why today in Germany, the eastern part have more protected areas than the western part. It was a pure coincidence due to this political integration of two countries into one. Nobody had foreseen that, apart this vice minister, Michael Sukow, and I met him recently. And you know, these are things that happen in life when some people, intelligent people, seize the opportunity to say, oh, there is a window for action, we go for it. No, there is something, there is awareness, and maybe we are not so much on the agenda that somebody will stop it, so we go for it. And I think this is, very important also for you. When you see a good opportunity, go for it. Seize the opportunity. Because it may be some trains pass only once in life. And I think it was a very exciting point to bring this into a new system. So we have to see. I think right now, for example, in the Pacific, there's a country called Kiribati, island states. I think 20,000 islands, little rocks coming out of the water. There is a Phoenix Islands area. This is a World Heritage Site created for the protection of the marine area. And right now, there are big ambitions of China for fishing. And right now, the government of the Kiribati Islands is trying to declassify half of this area from the protection ground and saying, the Chinese fleet, you can go fish there. I think it's a real step back, and we should stop that. But the Kiribati government says also, it's fine, your protection is excellent, but we need income. Where is this income coming from? You see? Again, always this conflict. Protection, very nice, we all understand. But we live there, we need income, we need also good life. We don't want to live in the Middle Age, we don't want to live on the coconut tree, we are in a modern society, I want to have internet, I want to have a house, air condition. Where is all this coming from? So it is not easy to say, yeah, we protect and then finish. We don't care about the rest. It doesn't work. It works when you integrate the needs of the human beings and when you try to do this. And there is no miraculous formula. Oh, you do that. And no. All the situations are different. There's a lot of knowledge out. It's a way how you use this knowledge. And I think this is what these programs are bringing to. They are bringing normally the most knowledgeable people about together and see where is a problem, create a solution. And I think there is no problem where there is no solution. But it takes time, and it takes hope, and I think it takes also positive thinking. When I see some people screaming that, oh, it's all so bad and it's all that, no, I don't accept that. I think one should always say, yeah, first of all, we live here, I think we're very privileged. We live in a very good environment, so there's no reason to be negative. And if there is a problem, even more, see for positive solutions. And they are. But it's a mindset, no? It is not, and they are not falling from sky. So you have to work for that, no? So, okay.
Just
Yeah.
to follow up on that comment, and perhaps to piggyback on Charlotte's comments earlier, because we're talking about development, and I was wondering whether the UN, Antonio Guterres is very critical of a lot of the lack of leaderships at the government level in terms of environmental protection.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering whether the UN was in a capacity to issue guidelines for differential developments in a finite environment, in a physically finite environment, whether so-called developing countries would lay a stronger claim to development potential compared to developed countries which have already undergone that development, and which is how it's linked with Charlotte's comments. Is, or some country advised to, I don't know whether we can call that, undergo negative growth, or at least go on a diet, energetically speaking, while there could be an allowance on developing countries to allow them to reach a certain standard, to even out the playing field. Is the UN in the capacity to do that, or?
Well, I say always, UN has the capacity that the countries want to have UN to have the capacity. Because sometimes people say, for example, in war situations, but UN is useless. I would not say so. But UN is not the policeman of the world that can really stop. It can only be the platform of discussion. It can be developed, these guidelines or these what you asked for, but then it's finished. And so guidelines exist for all and everything. Very, very specific. Also, but for example, on technology transfer, on training, on all sort of capacity building. What you say, the lack of leadership. Yeah, this is a favorite of Antonio Guterres, saying you could do more, but you are not doing it. Yeah, but there is also what it's called the Realpolitik. Made a lot of ambitions, but you must have the means to meet these ambitions. Do you have it? Depends. In many countries, we see that environment is still low on the agenda. You can only say, and I think the world is more and more saying that this is wrong. And economic development, for example, GDP, this gross development product, I think it's a very wrong measure of growth of a country, because it measures positive and negative things together. So, for example, you destroy something, or you build something and you destroy something. Both actions, economic actions, are counted as an investment, as part of it. But at the same time, in fact, they neutralize. The effect is on growth is zero. I think one should rather think about the economic wealth of a country. So redefinition this GDP. When you have a lot of industrial production, for example, you say, wow, our figures are going up. But at the same time, you have a lot of pollution, And you say, but we are doing also a lot on pollution, so the figure is even more, is even higher. But in fact, the figure should bring down, you know? No, because it's controversial. But no, it's quoted. So in that sense, I think this wealth of a country should be right the measuring. On leadership is, of course, always the same story. In most of the countries, we are living in democracy. It's the people that decide. The same is for consumption patterns. I always say, as a citizen, you have two cards to decide. No? The one is your electoral card. You can vote for whom you want. The best one, who is doing in your things, in your thinking, the best policy, and your credit card. You can buy what you want to buy. If it's environmentally highly polluting, destructing, or it's a very good product, environmentally healthy, so ever. So you can really decide. You are society. You are deciding it, and you can also decide who will be your leaders. This is in democracy. This is possible, no? But of course, one should not think that one person decides everything. It's just a community. There is a lot of criticism on this, working also on UN, but if somebody tells me that he has a better system, I will immediately go for it. So right now, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst system of the world, but I don't know a better one.
Do you have, perhaps, since it's quite topical, a comment on the nature of the COP meetings and perhaps the outcome of the most recent one?
Yeah, the COP meetings. For my taste, they are too frequent. The one group is meeting every 2 years, the other one group is meeting every year. Several thousands of people traveling there. The results are quite meager. I think what we would, that's my personal opinion, no? I think we would need less meetings, but better prepared. And not just head of states coming together, and whether the prime minister or the president or so on is coming, this is not that important. I think important that what comes out. The Paris Agreement, for example, this was important. When they decided on 1.5 degree increase of global temperature, not more, this was a real outcome, this was a real target that you can then say now in the national policy, put it in your policy and apply it. But to come to that, I think one would not have needed 10 COPs, but one would maybe needed this one COP and some preparatory meetings, no? Because it costs a lot of money. At the same time, on the political arena, visibility of countries in itself is quite important. There was a G20 meeting in Bali now. Is this important in the right political life we are living right now with some war situations? I think it was. In the MAP program, for example, we have also global meetings to decide on global action plans. And this global action plan is, for example, for 10 years. So these meetings take place every 10 years, bring together 1,000, 1,200 participants. I think this is needed, this is worthwhile, because these are global programs. This is, again, not decided by the Secretariat. This is decided by the people, by the what we call the MAP national committees, people nominated by the country to work for that, and by the representatives of the biosphere reserves. So, for example, the last meeting of the MAP program was in Lima, in Peru, in 2016, 16. And we had there more than 1,000 participants. I think there was a group from 10, 12 people from Japan, representing the national committees, the biosphere reserves and the activities here.
And that 1.5 degrees target, what's your feeling on our chances to?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was important to have a target. Because if not, you say, oh, do this, do those. What for? To define a target is very difficult. Because you have a lot of lobbies that do not want that. For example, all the fossil fuel lobbies, I mean, whether it's gas, oil, coal, they say, no, there is no problem. You have other lobbies that say it's very important, like, for example, nuclear energy. And we should go immediately out of all fossil, and we should put everything in nuclear energy. I think Japan made the experience. Maybe not the best. The best is, of course, what we know is a sort of mix. To, on the long run, abandon entirely the fossil energy. But this cannot be done just like that. You cannot just stop a system and say, no. I mean, these are long processes. But for this, you need target figures. And one target figure was really this 1.5 degree, because with this, the scientists concluded that sea level rise would have more or less this impact, the temperature. And when we say temperature here, you may have all noticed it has become warmer here, but it's still livable. But when you go to some Saharan countries, you have 50 degrees. I mean, 50 degrees is not livable anymore. 50 degrees is if you want to live in your own oven. This is a total other story. No? Will also from concerning CO2, you know, in the northern part of the globe, there's a permafrost. Permafrost means totally frozen soil with a huge amount of biodiversity, with a huge amount of organic biomass that is frozen, stable. If all this is melting, this will be released into the air and will be produced by far more CO2 in the air than burning of fossil fuels. So consequences of climate change can be heavy. But we know also that climate change happened in the history of the world, of the Earth, let's say, but not that quick. And the adaptation of our ecosystems to this change, this is, I think, the very target. No? I hope I replied. By the way, I will leave you, I brought you a map on the World Network of Biosphere Reserves, that you have at least one piece of paper. Here, this is all with the countries and also the relationship from all this to the SDGs. So we will use it later. Maybe I will give it around. I put it here for you and then let it circulate.
What is your opinion on Japan increasing the nuclear energy?
My opinion on the nuclear energy.
Yes, so Japan is increasing nuclear energy.
Well, I mean, also nuclear energy, you need for this, I mean, for the classic nuclear energy, you need this uranium, and this is also limited. So to invest in this energy too much means that you don't invest in other energies. Right now we have this nuclear energy. It has produced very good, let's say, electricity. For example, France is 75% of the electric energy in France is nuclear. There were no accidents. There was nothing in that sense. But, for example, the waste, treatment of the waste is extremely costly. And people say nuclear energy is cheap. When you make the total bill, it is not that cheap. because you don't, this is what I said earlier with the GDP, you don't count all the waste treatment, and you don't count the deconstruction of a nuclear plant. Deconstruction of a nuclear power plant takes at least 20 years of work, where this plant is producing nothing but is costing a lot. Because nuclear waste, you cannot just dump it, throw it away. You can dump it, you can put it very deep into the earth, into the soil, and make it sort of disappear. But this costs a lot of money. So for me, the energy future lies in the renewable energy. Of course, there is a diminishing of use of energy as much as possible. The renewable energy, I think, made extreme progress. In Germany, it's almost 50% now. So it's a big figure, 50%, I think. But it needs also investment, because it needs technologies. Renewable energy today is not what it was 40 years ago. So this is coming, this is developing. And, but right now, I mean, we are living in the world we are living, always being in movement and transformation. We are using our cars, still using fuel or gas and so on. And hopefully one day there will be only electric cars, for example, or maybe other forms of transport that we still don't know.
I think there's also hydrogen cars. Hydrogen cars, especially?
Hydrogen?
In cars, right? Is that like about adoption of electricity?
Yeah, this is the big idea, no? I mean, this is the energy of the future, hydrogen. Hydrogen, you know, when you split water electrically, you have hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen you can release into the air, it's nice. And the hydrogen is your fuel. For example, in the Sahara, there is a lot of light, so a lot of creation of electric energy. If you would have water there, you could create hydrogen, and this can be used. The problem with hydrogen is highly explosive, and it even in the past, I don't know so much about the techniques because I'm not an engineer. When you have a steel bottle, hydrogen goes through the steel because it's a very small molecule, so it goes through. But I mean, I'm not really the engineer for that. I think all the technologies are working on that. But still, fossil fuel is very cheap, so people are just selling it. And what I said earlier about the lobbies of fossil fuel use are very strong, and they want to sell that because also extracting fossil fuel costs a lot of money. And so selling the fossil energy, they are earning money. If you would stop all this, there would be a huge loss of all these infrastructure. They do not want to lose all this. No? This is, for example, when in Germany, when the investment was very strong in renewable energies, when the price of fossil fuel dropped a lot, the renewable energy became very expensive. So in the markets here, when you go here to Isogo, I think there is the petrol refineries, no? There is a competition between the energy markets. And of course, the investment is there, but people who invest want to have return for investment. It's always the same story. So I think right now in the normal politics, there is a tendency really to invest in renewable energy worldwide where it's possible. We need certainly more technology for that. This is not enough what we have right now. Hydrogen is, I think, for me, is the energy of the future. I think even that the electric car system will not. This is not the last word, no? But then you must ask an engineer. I brought also with me here one little brochure of the university that employs me. So I always give it around if you want to read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
10 o'clock? Okay. Arigatou gozaimasu.